The Gukurahundi Genocide issue has been on the cards in Zimbabwe for almost 4 decades. That's 40 years, and a lasting solution has been elusive, mainly due to the fact that the Mugabe regime has always been in denial. Even the Mnangagwa regime, they were also in denial. One can recall the Justice Minister, Ziyambi, making utterances to the effect that the Gukurahundi genocide issue is dead and buried. We have seen also some ZANU-PF leaders from Matabeleland, for example, Oben Pofu, declaring that the Gukurahundi issue was resolved when Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe signed the Unit Accord. But no. The ZANU-PF government has been citing the Unit Accord, which was signed between PF-ZAPU and ZANU-PF, as the panacea to the entire Gukurahundi massacre issue. But it's either one is being naive or criminal and deliberately walking on quicksand, because by narrowing down such an emotive issue to just 2 political parties, yet the massacre happened across the political divide. It's not only people who were members of PF-ZAPU who were massacred, and it's being dishonest to apportion a certain political party like PF-ZAPU, for example, to the entire 2 regions of the Midlands and Matabeleland, because there were other political parties which were also operational in those areas. For example, ANC and its people, ZANU Ndonga, NFZ, and other political parties. But we have seen in recent months Mnangagwa himself taking the initiative and inviting the chiefs to take a lead in the entire process of trying to find a lasting solution. The Zimbabwe government says that it has set a budget to expedite the process which is being led by the chiefs, and they hope that they are going to find a lasting solution. The only weakness that, or not the only rather, but one of the weaknesses that I see is that this budget is only earmarked to a certain section of the country, and the chiefs who are partaking in this process are also from that same section, which is Matabeleland, and yet the Midlands has been left out. Maybe it's a pilot project that they are embarking on, time will tell. The other challenge is the chiefs who are leading this have been seen to be partisan, and they've also received handouts in cash, vehicles, motorcycles, bicycles from the ZANU-PF government. You know, whilst their subjects are in deep crisis, in poverty. Therefore, in trying to come up with a lasting solution to this emotive issue, it is paramount that we also take a leaf from other countries who experienced similar challenges, where one section of the population deliberately and without a remorse exercised with impunity such heinous crimes. You know, on another section of the same community, Rwanda, for example, and South Africa are some of the countries where one can take a leaf from. Although both countries today, as we speak, have their own challenges which remained unresolved when they were trying to address the crimes against humanity which occurred in those countries. Rwanda has got its challenges, South Africa has got its challenges, indicating that whatever solution that was prescribed then may not have adequately addressed all issues. But there was movement. People were able to bury the past, forgive, and they were able to get justice, which is very vital. And those who committed the atrocities came forward and apologized. They were remorseful. Let's listen to an interview by ANC News, which was conducted before the burial of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and how he perceived the whole reconciliation concept.
Very important and crucial role in the TRC. Do you think that justice was done?
Well, the TRC had many objectives. It was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A central task of the TRC was not to punish, but to achieve the reconciliation. You have a very, very divided society. South Africa, as it was then, as it continues to be, very divided, capable of intense conflict. Fears always that one day they might break an outbreak of a racial war. The matter of national reconciliation was very vital to the work of the TRC. So it contributed in part to that. The matter of punishment had to do with what hopefully would only be a handful of people who would refuse to go through the amnesty process. So that then we deal with the justice issue in that manner. And of course, then there would be people who would want to subtract themselves from the amnesty process, in which case the law has to kick in and do what needs to be done. That is an outstanding job. But that was not central to the tasks of the TRC. The task of the TRC was to help us to achieve this national reconciliation, which we still need to this day.
Mr. President, do you agree with the families that are still seeking closure?
You know, I lost my son. I lost my brother. My father stayed in jail for many years. All of us need closure. All of us absolutely need closure. And whatever needs to be done to achieve that closure, let it be done. But I think as a country, so those things must be done for us. Individuals were directly affected in the way that I'm explaining to you. But for the country as a whole, the major task the country needs is a process of national reconciliation. We must deal with these things which divide our country, which the levels of poverty are too high, the levels of inequality in wealth, in income, in everything, on a racial basis, those things need to be addressed, because unless you address them, then you won't have the reconciliation. These are major, major tasks. Now, the TRC could not attend to those matters. The rest of us, the political activists, the leadership, and so on, to say, let's create the society visualized in our constitution, because that would give the basis for the kind of reconciliation for which the TRC made a contribution. So I'm saying that is central. That is central. The matter of people who did not go to get amnesty must be pursued, must be resolved. But we can't say that becomes the central national task. The central national task is to rescue our country from the evils of the legacy of the apartheid system. It's very pervasive in all manner of ways: poverty, unemployment, all of these things, which I'm saying are very central to any process of national reconciliation. So I think that's where we need to focus.
And given that, then you realize that is it prudent for Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF to be leading this reconciliation exercise, this exercise to find a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi Genocide? President Thabo Mbeki, when addressing the ANC KwaZulu-Natal province on the day they were commemorating Robert Mugabe, said a number of things. And again, we see the person who was leading the Gukurahundi Genocide, who was Prime Minister then, being celebrated by neighboring states. Look, that creates a problem, because as Africans, where do we draw the line? Where do we say this is a no? This person can never have been accorded such a platform. But again, let's listen to this SABC video clip where President Thabo Mbeki is addressing.
In 1978, By this time, Comrade Mugabe had, of course, after serving 10 years in jail in Zimbabwe, had managed to leave after he was released and was in Mozambique, and took over the presidency of ZANU in 1977. 1978, we get a message while we're in Lusaka that there is a delegation of ZANU that's coming from Mozambique to see the ANC. It was led by somebody who later became the vice president of Zimbabwe, Simon Mzenda. And we were scratching our heads as to why such a senior delegation from ZANU-PF was coming to see us. Because, as I was saying, for years now we had been working with ZAPU rather than ZANU. The delegation came, led, as I was saying, by Simon Mzenda, who was the deputy to President Mugabe, and made a very, very interesting and a very important proposition. They said that already the ZANLA forces, that's the armed wing, were fighting along the Limpopo. And they said their experience was, of the armed units, was that the population in the then northern Transvaal were the ones who were supplying their units with medicines. Any medicine they needed, they would get from our people in the northern Transvaal. Where they needed radios to listen, for instance, to their broadcasts from Mozambique, the population in the northern Transvaal gave them those radios. So it was a fascinating story to listen to, that they are interacting very regularly with the population in the northern Transvaal. And they said then the reason we've come to Lusaka is because that population supports the ANC. And what we're proposing is that cadres of MK should come and join the ZANLA units so that as they operate along the Limpopo, the MK comrades could cross the river and interact with this problem, this population in the northern Transvaal, which was ANC in terms of its orientation. Now, this was a striking thing, because I'm saying, comrades, that since ZANU had broken away from ZAPU, 15 years later, during which 15 years the ANC had not worked with ZANU, 15 years later, Robert Mugabe sent his deputy to see the ANC to say, we are in a common struggle. We now have a possibility to assist you people in terms of engagement with the masses of the people in South Africa, and therefore, could you then get your comrades to come and join our units, and we will make sure that they are able to interact with this population in what is now Limpopo. I think that was a very clear demonstration even then, 1978, of the firm loyalty that Comrade President Mugabe had to the ANC and to our struggle here at home. That operation didn't work. And the reason was that MK already had some of its cadres with the ZAPU combatants in Zebra. And there was a fear among our military comrades that you could have a backlash. And so you would have these MK comrades shooting at each other, some from ZIPRA and the other ones from ZANU. The political leadership was very much in favor of doing what was proposed in terms of our cadres joining ZANU. But I'm saying because of those considerations, we said, all right, let's put the matter in abeyance. We'll have to come back to it.
Did the vengeful Mugabe and his ZANU-PF forgive the Kondowesizwe and the ANC for this rejection? It's something worth pondering about. Let's listen again to former President Thabo Mbeki.
Now Zimbabwe is independent. Let's go back to the question that you raised in 1978. The need for Zimbabwe to help to support our struggle in South Africa. So President Mugabe said, Prime Minister Mugabe said to him, look, if you ask for permission from me that the ANC must operate from Zimbabwe, I will say wait. Because you can see, we are carrying so many of Smith's people, like the ones I've mentioned, many others. Give us time, those people will disappear, and then it becomes more easier for you to operate from Zimbabwe. He said, if you ask me, that's the response I'll give you. But rather than asking me, he says, why don't you send some of your people to Zimbabwe now to make an assessment, for the ANC to make an assessment for itself as to whether it can operate. So you don't have to depend on Robert Mugabe. So OR came back to Lusaka and reported this, and we said, very good idea. And indeed, we went to Zimbabwe. I was in that delegation, which went to Zimbabwe to assess the situation to see whether we can operate. Yeah. So that was in the very first month of the independence of Zimbabwe. So we stayed in Zimbabwe for 2 weeks or so, wandered around, talked to people, went back to Lusaka and said, of course we can always operate in Zimbabwe. Some operations would have to be underground. Some of them would have to be open above ground. But of course we can. So fine. So OR then asked, he had to go back to talk to Prime Minister Mugabe about that. And I went with him. Now, comrades, I'm talking about April, May 1980. This is a new young Zimbabwe. Across the border, the Limpopo, you have an apartheid regime which is intensely hostile to this government that's taken over in Zimbabwe. And obviously very intensely hostile, similarly to the ANC. But we're saying, despite that, what can be done? So we came back and met with President Mugabe, Prime Minister. As it happens, he was accompanied by the current president of Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa, who was at the time Minister of National Security. And so OR says to Prime Minister Mugabe, we can operate. So Prime Minister Mugabe says, well, okay, if that's your decision, fine. Now, why don't we arrange that Thabo here and Emerson must sit together and work out how you are going to operate. Now, comrades, I'm saying all of these things. I don't think they've been said before. We worked out a system of cooperation, which meant Zimbabwe Defense Force actually moved a battalion of the army to the banks of the Limpopo. The reason for that was that we could then bring in weapons from Zambia into Zimbabwe, which the Zimbabwe army would pick up at the border, take them through Zimbabwe to that battalion, so that our people would then come into Zimbabwe carrying no weapons. Instead, the Zimbabwe government would issue them with false identity cards. There were a lot of roadblocks at that time. So as they go through as Zimbabweans and collect their weapons on the banks of the Limpopo. I'm saying this is April, May 1980. There were other decisions that were taken, like the Zimbabwe government would issue us with passports which identify some of us as Zimbabwean, in order to facilitate movement in the context of any matter that would be sensitive. So instead of me traveling as Thabo Mbeki to some secret meeting somewhere in the world, I would travel as Patrick João all manner of detail like that, which were agreed. Some time later, I met a comrade who's late now. He used to be the chief of the Zimbabwe Air Force. And one day he said, this is some 2 or 3 years after this, 1980 thing. And he says to me, the people that you put here as a result of this agreement, I think you should move them out of Harare. The comrades who were in charge of this whole underground thing, move them out of Harare. So I say, why? He says, it's because I see them too often in places where they serve beer. And he says, send them to the bush, because there they will be bitten by mosquitoes. And the more the mosquitoes they bite them, the more they'll want to get home.
It is quite significant that former President Thabo Mbeki mentions this meeting with Jose Tungamirai, who was then the Air Marshal at the time, because the coincidence of Tungamirai's suggestion and the start of the Gukurahundi operation raises a lot of eyebrows. It seems now the ZANU-PF government was in the process of ejecting the Umkhonto weSizwe from Zimbabwe and starting the massacre in Matabeleland. Let's listen again to former President Thabo Mbeki.
Mr. President, I don't want to get too political, and I want to remain on the topic of the Archbishop and the memories and the lessons we can learn. But I'm keen to get a sense of what your stance is about those calling for the fact that de Klerk should have been prosecuted.
No, I think the decision was correct. The decision that the country took to say that to deal with the matter of justice in South Africa, to deal with the issue of justice, it would not help us to say, let's take the Nuremberg route. Let those people who were responsible for apartheid, let them be charged. We were avoiding a situation where you would have a perpetuation of the conflict. If you said, if to the apartheid generals and the apartheid police and F.W. de Klerk and all of these people, that what democracy means is that you are going to be charged and sent to jail, then why would they have accepted to have a democratic South Africa? They would have resisted. They would have fought back. So we said, no, we need democracy, we need justice, we need reconciliation. How do you achieve all of those things together? So the route that South Africa took, which was a truth and reconciliation route, it was to address the matter of justice. And I think it was correct. To have taken any other position, to say that charge de Klerk, charge General Meiring, charge General van der Merwe, all of these people, we would have said, let's continue the war. We should never have come back into exile in a situation like that. We should have stayed in Lusaka, because you can't come here and say, let's negotiate a change, and then I'm going to make sure that on day one of democracy, we are taking you to court. It would have just meant a perpetuation of the conflict, and we wanted to avoid that.
Listening to President Thabo Mbeki speaking about the TRC, one gets the sense of the beauty of having the victim at the center of the process. Had President Mbeki not mentioned his loss during the apartheid period, it would have been very difficult to pick that is in actual fact a victim. And that is something which is found wanting in the entire Zimbabwe Gukurahundi Genocide reconciliation process. The victims are being treated like objects. They are not taking the center stage. They are being pushed right, front and forward, just like objects. Again, if you listen to this Mnangagwa video clip, which was posted on social media by Zimbabwe's government spokesperson, Nick Mangwana.
As we give space to our traditional leaders to lead processes of reconciliation and repair, we should guard against those negative elements which aim to reignite frozen differences in order to throw us back into renewed conflict. As always, there are sinister forces which seek to profit from a divided and divisive past. They must not succeed. We have built national institutions for conflict prevention, management and resolution. We have introduced in our daily workings mechanisms to prevent conflicts, however minor or localized. Above all, we continue to monitor and find answers to new emerging situations of potential conflict, so these are obviated before they occur. It is from such mechanisms, through such vigilance, that peace is forged and won, and that nations get durably built. A key area requiring and receiving serious attention is that of balanced, inclusive development, which leaves no one and no community behind.
Mnangagwa is talking of having systems in place to obviate, and mind you, obviate is synonymous with Gukurahundi, because the Gukurahundi is a Shona name for the rain that clears the chaff. See, is the rain which obviates the chaff. So when Mnangagwa is making such a chilling statement, and yet people are trying to find a lasting solution, and people are not even aware, of the nature of those systems that he's talking about. How then do we trust the process? How then do we think those involved are not part of his systems, or they're not being controlled by the systems that he's talking about? And are they not afraid of being obviated? Those are some of the sticking points that makes the entire process suspect. The starting point would obviously been the Dumbuchena Chiambakwe Commission of Inquiry report. And when the government spokesperson Nick Mangwana was asked on X by one guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but he went on to say the Chiambakwe Commission report is nowhere to be found. It disappeared, just vanished into thin air. So in the absence of the Chiambakwe Dumbuchena report, or the Dumbuchena Chiambakwe report, the truth will be very sketchy. And also given that most of the victims probably died, some were displaced and are now living in foreign lands, it might be very difficult to get the truth and to come up with a lasting solution to the Gukurahundi crisis. In the absence of spiritual leaders, the country hasn't started to deal with the Gukurahundi atrocities. When I'm speaking about spiritual leaders, I want to be very specific. It is fundamentally important for me to stress the fact that I am not referring to church leaders. They don't follow anywhere close to this issue of the dead, the reburials, and the bringing back of the person's spirit into the family. They are nowhere near, they don't understand that. So as long as we have not included African spirituality and African spiritual leaders, we are still on zero. We haven't started addressing the Gukurahundi matter. The danger of leaving out spiritual leaders is that Currently, the process is looking at the victims and addressing the concerns of the victims, which is okay. But the perpetrator must also be addressed, must also be cleansed of the evil deed, and that can only be done by spiritual leaders. Our only consolation is that the matter is to do with the dead. The dead will fight their own battles right to the bitter end. You cannot manipulate the dead. You cannot cheat the dead. Therefore, what is required is honesty, and transparency, so that this matter can be resolved for once and for all. Imagine it's now 40 years on and the matter is still boiling. Therefore, we are happy that the spirit of the dead is restless as we speak, and honesty will prevail.